Energy, and I want to welcome you to our discussion about intelligent home energy management for net zero. More than 51% of U.S. home carbon footprint comes from space heating and air conditioning in our homes. And so this is really a very critical conversation. Today we are joined by three fantastic speakers. Hakan Yilmaz, who's a Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer from Carrier. Catherine Neeb, the Chief Sustainability and Philanthropy Officer from Duke Energy. That's a lot. And Eric Oliver, who is the president of the Association of Energy Engineers. For those of you who are not familiar with the Alliance, I just want to take a second and share about who we are. We are a broad coalition based in the States. We are focused on energy efficiency. We have a bipartisan coalition that is made up of industry, government, academia, other nonprofit stakeholders, as well as environmental justice organizations. And we believe that efficiency is not only the first fuel, but it is literally what we need to do first if we are going to meet any of our carbon goals, our climate goals. And it starts with the people. Oftentimes, we talk about climate in big ways, and for ordinary people, they may not understand how can they participate in this. And so this conversation about what we can do in our homes, in our residences, and why it's important to be focusing on our buildings first, I think is really, really critical. So I'm very excited to have the three of you join us. I'm going to invite you each to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about you, take a couple of minutes, and why this particular topic is important to you. So please add that in your introduction. And then we'll get started with some questions, and hopefully we'll have a nice, fruitful discussion. Eric, why don't you start?
Great, thank you very much. My name is Eric Oliver. I am the founder of an energy consulting business called Earthwide LLC. We focus on demand-side energy management, performing energy audits and commissioning and retro-commissioning and modeling services based in Northern Virginia. I am also the president of the Association of Energy Engineers this year. It's an organization based in Atlanta, but it's an international organization of energy professionals focused on training and certifications and networking to further the advance of energy conservation. AEE is an observer organization here at COP28, promoting the idea that energy efficiency is the important first step in reaching climate goals. So that's the idea that we're trying to promote here, and we're very excited to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. Hakan?
Well, it's great to be here, and thanks for the kind introductions. I'm Hakan Yilmaz. I'm the corporate CTO, Chief Technology Officer for Carrier Global. I spent most of my career in automotive and then in aerospace industries before joining Carrier in building technologies and HVAC solutions. I spent most of my career basically on energy efficiency and transforming towards electrification and sustainability in different industries. And I'm super excited to be in building technologies and climatization organization Carrier because we are on an amazing journey transforming our company to be a leader in intelligent climate and energy solutions provider. And this journey is super impactful. We're going to talk about it in the rest of the panel. We're really moving towards providing equipment in cooling and heating to a solutions provider for climate and energy. It's super exciting.
Looking forward to hearing more about that. Catherine, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great, and it's so great to be here with all of you, and thank you for the opportunity to share. I'm Catherine Neeb. I'm the Chief Sustainability and Philanthropy Officer at Duke Energy, as well as the SVP of National Engagement and Strategy. I've worked in sustainability and stakeholder engagement for close to 25 years. I joined Duke about 3 years ago and have been so excited to get deeper on the energy transition. We've been saying for a long time, if you've been working in sustainability, that the energy transition we're right at the precipice of it, and it's here, it's happening now, and it's an incredibly exciting time to be in this sector, involving so many different organizations and perspectives. Prior to Duke, I was at Walmart for 7.5 years. At the tail end of my career at Walmart, I was the head of ESG for the enterprise, and prior to that, I was at WWF. I like to say the pandas, not the wrestlers, leading a large global partnership with the Coca-Cola Company. And the reason I'm excited about this conversation is the energy transition is truly a systems challenge. It's going to take all of us working together to get all the way to net zero, and homes and individuals are really a key part and a key enabler of getting all the way to net zero.
Thank you. So I like to have these conversations, and I do like to make them a little bit personal. So I'm going to share with you guys a little bit about why I think this conversation is so important for me personally. As a kid growing up with my mom, I can remember our power being shut off. because our bills were too high. And I can particularly remember a time where I think I was in high school and my mother had an electric bill that was like $1,500, like a ridiculous amount of money. And as a kid, you don't fully appreciate like how much that is and what a struggle that is. But certainly now, doing what I'm doing today, I can fully appreciate how new technology would have made her life so much easier. I won't tell you how many years ago. I won't say that. The Alliance is about to release a report called Demand is the New Supply. And we have been spending a full year and a half trying to really let people think about, let's talk about the plan, let's talk about demand, let's talk about demand. And in that report that has been really thankfully supported by Carrier and researched by DNV, we identified 3 barriers to getting this done at the residential level. And I'd like to share those with you because I think that is going to be a nice context for this conversation. The first barrier is that high levels of participation across a diverse geography are needed on the residential side to create meaningful programs that can be used by distribution operators, and we know that there's a very low footprint of customers across geographies who are actually using these kinds of programs today. The second barrier is that utility business models and operations and regulatory frameworks interact in ways that disincentivize implementation of residential DR. We all know that that is also true if you work in that space, and I might add that because the regulatory frameworks can be different, depending on where you are located, it adds an additional layer of complexity when you're trying to manage and do this at scale. And the third is that achieving energy equity and environmental justice requires looking at the problem from a different perspective. And I would say that that is probably the biggest barrier, but the most important part of this work if we are actually going to be successful. How do we ensure that everybody is engaged, has an opportunity to participate, does participate, and has access to all the technology that they need to do so? And so with that, I have some questions for you guys. And the first is really around accelerating the clean energy transition. And so I'm going to start with you, Catherine, but I'm going to invite, we have a small panel, I'm going to invite all of you. If someone has a comment that they'd like to add, please do so. And feel free to ask one another questions if someone says something intriguing. It's always good to have a good discussion. And so when we're talking about accelerating the clean energy transition, Catherine, tell us a little bit about how Duke is going to do that, given all the complexities and things that you have to work through.
Yeah, when we think about how we're going to achieve our net zero goals, it's really focused on 2 kind of core factors. The first is generation. How are we transitioning and leading the largest planned retirement of coal in our industry? How are we transforming that generation into renewable, into nuclear, and other zero-emitting technology? And a lot of attention gets paid to the generation side of the equation. But I think equally important, but not always appreciated or well understood, is how critical the grid is. If you cannot connect some of that new generation into the grid and get it to people where they need it, when they need it, it doesn't kind of work together. So as we think about our next decade, we have a $145 billion capital plan. 85% of that is directed towards the clean energy transformation, and $75 billion, roughly half of that, is focused on modernizing the grid. And very simply put, we're moving from an energy system in the US where you generate, transmit, and distribute in one direction with very predictable demand patterns to one which is intermittent and distributed, which means you have energy coming on the system and going offline all the time, and you have customers, residences, industries, and others kind of pulling off that energy system at different moments in time and sometimes very unpredictable patterns. And as we look at the next, say, 20 or so odd years, what we can expect across the US is energy demand is going to double, if not triple. So the challenge for the utility sector is to try to figure out how do we take some of the existing generation offline, essentially rebuild the grid so that it can handle this kind of next generation technology, and do this all in a way that does not sacrifice reliability, something in the US that I think is often taken very much for granted relative to other places in the world, and also being mindful of affordability, because all of that stuff that we need to build, customers do end up needing to pay for. So we've got to do this in a way that's equitable and that provides access for all.
And so tell me, Catherine, are there challenges to being able to get the grid to a position where we can actually do that? What are those challenges about addressing this grid match and managing load in the way that we're going to need to in the future?
Yeah. So there are a whole host of challenges to the energy transition. Certainly we need smart policy in place so that we can create the frameworks that we need. We need a supply chain to cooperate. We need customers and consumers and communities to really embrace the energy transition fully. When we talk about doubling, if not tripling, the amount of transmission that we're building across the U.S., when we're talking about citing renewables and other things, this is going to be something that is going to impact so many different people. And so we really need to spend some time upfront educating all of our stakeholders about the energy transition and net why it is of benefit to the U.S. and to our customers. And just as an aside on that point, we looked at our $145 billion capital plan and we said, what are the positive economic outputs of our energy transition? So often in sustainability, we get caught in this trap of what's the cost and what are the negative externalities of moving in kind of a green or a more sustainable approach. What we found is that our $145 billion capital plan translates to $250 billion of positive economic output. And so for me, as a sustainability practitioner, that's a really wonderful opportunity when it's the chance to kind of try and figure out how do we match those benefits with our communities and with our customers in a really compelling way, creating opportunity for all. And I know we'll get into the specifics on the nuance on the residential side, but certainly a real opportunity there as well.
Sure.
Yeah,
Eric, please.
Yes, as Catherine was saying, a lot of those projections for supply side are based on what they think consumption is going to be in the future. And one of the goals from our side on energy efficiency is to make those projections wrong. I've always been a firm believer that about 35% of the energy we use in this country is just wasted. Those are lights left on in rooms. They're thermostats that are cooling the house when people are on vacation. So if we could just eliminate energy waste, we could cut that curve down by a third. And then if we incorporate energy efficiency and energy efficient technologies that are available today, we could make those projections so low that we don't need to increase as much supply as we need to, because demand reduction is the cheapest and quickest way to get energy supply.
Sure. So Hakan, you make the technology. Tell us how do you do it? How do you guys think about that?
Absolutely. Hearing Catherine talk about how we transform the grid towards cleaner energy is really music to our ears, because when we look at Carrier journey on sustainability, more than 99% of our sustainability commitments and emissions actually come from our products and how they're used in the field, what kind of energy they use to operate in the field. So the type of energy that's coming to the grid to feed our products is super critical for us, and we need to be a part of this ecosystem, and that's where the journey starts for us. When you look at the HVAC industry, the world's total electricity is consumed by about 40% by buildings and homes, and about 40% of that is climatization, HVAC units, heating and cooling. So about 16% of the global electricity is used for the heat pumps and HVAC units for cooling and heating. That's tremendous energy draw from the grid. If you look at just Carrier's equipment, we are active in so many countries around the world with different brands under the Carrier umbrella. We're in millions of buildings and homes. Our installed equipment today provide cooling to over 500 million people every day. And when they're all operating, they consume about 3% of entire global electricity. With the transition from furnaces and boilers to heat pump on the heating side, this 3% will go up to 4% very soon. And the other piece is the cooling side, HVAC side. Today, about 2.8 billion people live in the hot zones like here. And only 8% have access to HVAC units today. So the prediction is that the HVAC deployment, the cooling system deployment, will be tripled by 2050. So that electricity demand, in addition to all the automotive, cars going electric, stoves going electric, everything going electric, I call it the Internet of Electrified Equipment booming, HVAC systems will exponentially grow, and their demand on the grid will be tremendous. Now, this is where the problem statement is, and this is how our journey starts. We just published our sustainability roadmap for 2050 commitments this week. And we're following a three-step approach. We looked at how do we go beyond 2030? How do we get to 2050? If we don't do anything today, and stay on our course, our equipment will consume from now until 2050 about 25 gigatons of CO2 in the field. That's massive. If we just stick to our 2030 targets and stay on that course, it's basically efficiency improvements, low GWPs, we still have about 15 gigatons to close in terms of CO2 gap. And this was our aha moment earlier this year with our technical experts. We said we need to go beyond our regulated requirements of efficiency improvements, low GWP, beyond that boundary and become a part of the electrical ecosystem and build more intelligent systems to solve that problem.
Okay. And so are there other emerging technologies that you think are needed for grid integration?
So what we are really looking at is 3 steps. Step 1 is electrification, right? We need to go from furnaces, boilers to heat pumps. That is clear. We need to build variable speed heat pumps, HVAC units. That is number 1. Is that sufficient? No. Step 2, we need to be fully connected, integrated. We need to build, I call it the trio of products together as a system. That is HVAC units with heat pumps and digital thermostat with full connectivity to the grid, and 3, onboard energy storage, either battery or thermal storage. This is completely essential because think of it this way, especially during the peak times, all the renewable energy, or most of the renewable energy, is unpredictable. The sun is down, the wind may not be there. At 5 p.m. you go boost your air conditioning or heater, and grid doesn't have enough clean energy to support. So somehow we need to either do pre-cool or preheat, or store some of that valuable low cost and clean energy when it's available during the day from the grid to onboard battery storage or thermal storage, and then use it during the peak times. And this is the main benefit. This way you can do load shifting. It's beneficial for the homeowner, the building operator, for us, for our sustainability goals in our business. And it's a resiliency support to the grid when needed, on demand, and guaranteed available in a decentralized fashion.
What I'd like to add to that is that technologies that I think are going to take us to the next level are smart home and smart meter technologies. We now have smart home systems that can not only help you manage your temperature settings remotely, even from across the world using your smartphone, but it can also control appliances. Appliances are now becoming part of the Internet of Things. They're connected to your Wi-Fi system, your refrigerator, your washing machine, your televisions. So now that becomes part of the entire system where you can control appliances and devices, even lighting in certain rooms. If you get to turn light off in a certain area, you can do it from vacation in Bermuda. But also the smart meters, what they do is they allow the utility to get real-time information about what is being consumed in your house and in real-time data, and also the building owners to also get information about how they're consuming energy. And so the more advanced smart meters can allow utilities to even ramp down or shut down devices during demand response scenarios. And so smart meters replacing the existing meters that are now will give both homeowners and the utility information that will help to manage the grid and help to reduce energy consumption at the end use.
Okay. So at least in the States, we know there are lots of places where people already have smart meters. We have access to heat pumps. So what's the challenge, right? Because we're not close to anything that would resemble scale. We're not even on the road to scale. So what's that gap, and how do we kind of fill in that gap so that we actually can get this done? We're not talking about technologies that don't exist. You all have mentioned technologies that are available to us today. So what is it that's needed to get us to be using these things more?
I think one of the perceptions is that energy efficiency is something you have to spend money on. And so people have ways that, they have budgets and they have to spend money in certain ways. So they think, well, they're looking at a heat pump. They look at a 13 SEER versus 16 SEER heat pump. Well, this one's cheaper, so I'll just go with this one. But I think what people need to realize is that spending money on energy efficiency pays itself back through reduced energy costs for the house. And especially if you can amortize those costs over time. There's something called an energy efficiency mortgage, where if you're buying a house, they will allow you to add energy efficiency upgrades to that house, including solar panels, and then bundle that in with the mortgage. And if you take energy efficiency and amortize that over 30 years, the very small incremental cost to your mortgage will be offset by large savings on your utility bill. So that's a strategy to help mitigate that barrier.
Catherine.
Yeah, so I'm not an engineer, so I'm going to try and simply explain the energy system, which is where I'm going to get into some real trouble. But when I think about one of the challenges, it's scale. I mean, you put your finger on exactly what the challenge is getting to scale, but it's also kind of a guarantee that you can access that energy when you need it.
Okay.
So very simply, for a utility, we need to be able to generate the amount of energy that is needed in the exact moment in time when that energy is needed. If you aren't able to do that, you risk destabilizing the entire grid. So utilities need to build enough generation, essentially, to supply the energy needed for a company like Duke, a January morning, which is when we tend to have peak energy demand. And so we can look at energy efficiency programs, we can look at all sorts of things, but if we can't guarantee that we can create the amount of energy in that moment in time, then they're nice programs, but they don't defer the need to build additional generation. I think what we're talking about here is an opportunity, and typically the customers who take advantage of those programs lose a perception of control. Can I charge my car when I want to charge it? Can I have my air conditioning or my heating at the right temperature at the right time? Can I run my laundry whenever I want to run my laundry? And I don't know about other cultures, but in the US, the ability to control your destiny and your fate is an important component to our culture. And so I think some of these programs that are really appealing is that they almost happen behind the scenes. And so you as a customer get the benefits of energy efficiency in terms of everything is still in your home as you expected to experience it, and ideally your bills are lower because you're no longer pulling as much energy off the system. As a utility, when we get to programs where we can quote unquote guarantee that those energy things, whatever they're called, I'm sure there's a technical term, where we can pull them off someone's home at scale in a way that mitigates our need to generate additional generation in that moment in time, it really helps mitigate against the cost of additional build. And I go back to the fact that we're expecting across the US to double, if not triple, the amount of energy demand that needs to be generated. So the residential customer, the large business, all kind of customers, all players in the ecosystem of energy have an important role to play in getting us all the way to net zero while balancing reliability and affordability.
So I want to stay with something that you said, because you talk about the participation of customers and the guarantee that customers are going to be okay and they're going to roll back when you need them to. But we also know that many customers don't participate in these programs at all, right? So we have this additional gap. And so how do you think about how do we encourage more customers to participate in any kind of efficiency program, whether that's, right, a variable heat pump or something else? How do we communicate and get more customers to even participate in these kinds of programs?
One of the things that we're really working across our jurisdictions, our states that we operate in partnership with our regulators, is looking at mitigating the cost of some of those energy efficiency programs. You talked about that $1,500 investment. Mm-hmm. For most people in the United States, getting their hands on $400 is categorized as an emergency. So we've got an opportunity as a utility to look at owners and renters and figure out how do we pull that initial cost of setting up an EV charger, installing an energy efficient HVAC device in their home, and really thinking through how do we accrue the kind of benefits of the energy that we're able to use with the cost impacts that someone, wouldn't be able to experience otherwise.
Okay, so go on.
Yes, I wanted to add on the scale question. I think to reach the sustainable solutions for net zero, we believe in two things. Number one, scale matters. Number two, comfort should not be sacrificed. Here's why. If the customers are going to be a part of the journey and they invest in electrification, electric heat pumps, electric cars, all electric, and they want to be a part of the journey, we should not ask them to sacrifice their comfort by supporting sustainable investments. So our view is that when you look at different electrification solutions, and I spent most of my career in automotive, but this was a part of my journey before, cars, electric cars, are a great asset and a liability for the grid because they carry massive batteries, 80, 100 kilowatt hour batteries. They can load quite a bit of electricity. They can discharge quite a bit of electricity, but they are designed for mobility. They're not designed for grid resiliency. They're designed for mobility. And when you want to get electricity out of the car back to the grid, you always need to get the consent from the owner, the operator, the driver to sacrifice or take risk. If you look at the other appliances in the home, where we operate with HVAC units, refrigerators, stove, dishwashers, etc. Most of those are controlled by the homeowner. They decide when to cook. They decide when to turn the dishwasher on. They decide when to do the laundry or put their phones in a plug or turn the TV on. You can do some sort of control, but again, you need customer in the loop. And people, all of us, have better things to worry about, other things, maybe not better, other things to worry about than energy efficiency and resiliency. There's some population who are really interested in this. They're very active, demand response programs, etc. But it is very hard to scale and count on. And what I hear from the utility side, from energy experts, is that if it is not guaranteed, you cannot count on it.
Yeah.
So the fact with HVAC units, why there is an opportunity here with the HVAC industry to make an impact, is that today, our units, heating, cooling, we consume a lot of electricity, period. Number two, with that consumption of electricity, we could stay on the course, on this path, and continue being a liability for the grid on electrification journey, or we can do something better, and we can turn that massive electricity consumption, a liability or load, into an asset for the grid. By bringing those three solutions together, we call it the three-step approach, right? Electrification, integration, and resilience. Electrification is transformation to heat pumps, once again. Integration is the trio of products, the heat pumps and the energy storage and the digital thermostats as a system approach connected to the grid, not only the consumer. And we manage the back end. We manage the back end with virtual power plant operators, with our cloud offering, with our digital solutions. We can do better than just providing the equipment to the consumer and have them deal with that problem. We can build, we have the technologies and smart engineers and digital experts to solve the problem, work with our partners on the energy utility side. And it's exactly what we're doing. We're actually working with Duke Energy right now, testing our heat pumps, integrated with our battery solution, with our digital thermostat, connected to cloud and to grid operator. We're doing a seamless demand response and resiliency testing right now with Duke Energy in their facility in Charlotte. And being a part of this ecosystem gives us a chance to find real applicable technologies that we can deploy at scale around the world and turn that hundreds of gigawatts of consumption on the HVAC units into a grid resiliency solution, an asset, a distributed asset that you can count on.
You know, if we're going to have a real impact, we should really try and infiltrate the home builder industry. I think that energy efficiency plays a very low priority in the home builders, and it's unfortunate. You know, if with the ideal world, every home would be built with at least one large south-facing roof that could house solar later on. Every house would come with a smart meter and a smart home system. That would just be part of it. You know, it's always frustrated me that especially with custom homes, that granite counters is an option, but geothermal heat pump system is not. You know, when if people could realize that you add in a geothermal heat pump system, you're going to save $500 a month in your energy bill with these large homes. They might choose that rather than the marble counter. So we should offer those as options. We should make that kind of at least not mandatory for home buyers, but show them, teach them, educate them about how energy efficiency will help them reduce their costs and make that part of the home builder process.
Yeah. So that's going to lead to my next question, but I'm going to actually follow up on something that a word that you've all talked about, which is scale. I think it's important for people to understand when we say scale, we need to get it to scale. What exactly does that mean? 50% penetration, 80% penetration, 10% penetration? What is scale for a normal consumer? What are we talking about for policymaker?
So maybe I get started. Scale for us is, that's a very interesting question. So when we look at our own Scope 3 emissions, once again, more than 99% of our sustainability depends on our Scope 3, how the products are used in the field, because we really consume a lot of energy in the field. For us, of course, Scope 3 is all about getting to net zero 2050. But for our customers, 2050 is 2030. So why is that? Because HVAC units are very resilient. They're reliable. It's great. But they last 15, 20 years or more in the field. If you're building a data center or building a new home or school in 2030, the type of energy management system you put in that building is relevant for your Scope 1, 2 by 2050, because those equipment will be there when you hit 2050. So we are very customer oriented, right? It's not only about our products being ready by 2050, but we also think about the impact we make on our customers' journey on sustainability. And HVAC industry is super relevant to not only grid resiliency, but also the sustainability commitments of our residential and commercial customers. This is why the clock is ticking. Accelerating that journey is great for everyone. We want to get to, in most of our markets, we want to get to variable speed HVAC units with connected thermostats all around the world. We want to get to about minimum 50% share in US market by 2030. Okay. That's our vision. But here's the other thing. Our industry, HVAC industry, is regulated. The bottom end is regulated by efficiency and with the GWP ratings of your refrigerants. That's going to push us up to be more efficient with variable systems. But there needs to be more, because then we have the ceiling on the reliability and cost driven by the consumers and operators and the channels. We are operating in that tight threshold, and we need to go above that boundary. We need to push those boundaries to offer more energy resilient, more sustainable solutions at the right time to our customers to meet their sustainability goals.
So you've made me a little bit afraid. Because if I understand what you're saying is that actually much of this equipment needs to be installed by 2030, which is 7 years from now, to hit a 2050 goal, right? So when we think about 2050, it's actually not 2050, it's today or the next 7 years. And I'm not sure that policy makers understand the speed at which we're really talking about. I might suggest, and Catherine, you tell me if you've heard this, certainly at the utility side, I've also heard utilities say the same thing when they talk about building out the grid. They're trying to build out a grid today that's going to be what they need in 2050, and not knowing if they have the technology or whatever available today so that it works the way it's supposed to. Is that accurate is, I guess, the first question.
The way I would characterize the way we're approaching it is moving as fast as we can on the technologies that are available today and preparing the grid to be as resilient as possible. And when I talk about resilient, I don't just mean to respond to climate, but I also mean to talk about the different types of energy that we will be adding to the system over the fullness of time, whether or not that's advanced nuclear small modular reactors, hydrogen to displace some of the gas, and or long duration storage. So there are a lot of technologies kind of on the horizon that the grid needs to be able for. But I think, and it certainly in the US takes about a decade to build a transmission line. So we're making decisions today about what the energy system looks like in 2035 and moving forward with some early stage permitting. But I think the modernization of the grid, I go back to that as being so critical, because what we're talking about here, this is why you need a modern grid. As we get to scale of people installing smarter technology in their home, as we start to shift our relationship with customers who just a few years ago were referred to as ratepayers, right. Now they're customers, and in the future we're talking about them as being partners, almost kind of mini power plants participating in the grid. That, to me, modernizing the grid so that it can handle this distributed, intermittent, who knows what the technology mix looks like in 2035, and deal with and manage effectively residential customers, businesses, et cetera, I think is a no regrets move.
So I'm going to let you answer, but I'm going to leave you a question, and I want you to wrap it in your response to this question as well, Hakan, which is, if we're trying to incentivize this transition, right, and you've added, Eric, home builders and getting home builders on board, we need technology providers on board, and we need, obviously, utilities and customers on board. What are the kinds of incentives that government is going to need to offer to get all these different types of audiences to agree to participate? Because they have different things that are important to them, right? So a home builder wants to be able to sell the house for the highest price. And we already acknowledge that customers don't necessarily care about what the furnace looks like as long as it keeps them comfortable. And so how do you marry those things so that a home builder will want to make the house as efficient as possible, so that customers will want to pay, right? All of it's kind of tied together. And then, so what is the role of government and policymakers to effectuate that change? Because they have some power to make that happen.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think we are already on a good journey with our utility partnership with UK Energy, because understanding the utility side, what is happening on the grid side in terms of renewable energy investments, the opportunities and limitations, gives us a clear indication of what we need to do to help out the homeowners, the utility, and us. Because if the grid cannot supply the clean energy to our equipment, we fail as well. We're on the same boat. We know that. So if I build a heat pump that is 100% electric, it's fully connected, but if the electricity is consuming is 30% fossil fuel, I'm missing my own target too, and my customers. So being a part of this ecosystem and inventing the future together, engaging, testing, ideating is super critical, and we really appreciate the partnership we have with UK Energy on this, because they give us a lot of insight on where we need to focus on to be better at what we're doing. The biggest challenge in our industry is, as I mentioned, our floor of requirements, the bottom end of the requirements, are coming from regulations on efficiency and GWP mainly, and safety and other things, of course. And we always design for next generation incremental efficiency improvements, a bit less GWP, low GWP. If you add all of those requirements, we are still way off from being net zero. And it's mainly because of the energy we are consuming from the grid and the cleanliness of the grid and availability of clean energy during the peak times. So what we need to do is we need to change our focus, and that's our third step in our sustainability roadmap that we published this week, how we're going to get to net zero by 2050. Electrification, integration, we talked about. The last step is resiliency. Design homes and energy systems in the homes and home energy management, building energy management systems for grid resiliency. That is a must-do for all of us, for our competitors and peers as well. Because if we don't design our equipment for grid resiliency, we all lose. Yeah. And to get to that scale, we cannot expect the homeowner and explain to them at every single kitchen counter with our channel partners and win them on board. It is a very difficult journey. We need support to get the initial momentum and the push from the regulators, from the policymakers, from the government incentives to get to the initial deployment. And a lot of governments are doing already the right things. And we need to accelerate that. I think we have a good start in the US as well, with the deployment of heat pumps and the fundings, et cetera, great deployments, great programs. I think we can do more. Once we get to a certain momentum, then the industry will pick it up. Once that becomes a regular process, then it becomes a standard, the trio of products, heat pumps, variable speed heat pumps, energy storage on board, and connected thermostat with virtual power plant connectivity. Once that becomes a standard, we can keep that momentum in the industry and our channels. But we need the help from policymakers and governments to give us that initial push.
I think the government has been painfully deficient at providing tax credits for energy efficiency, specifically to homeowners. I think that variable speed heat pumps should come with a 50% tax credit to offset some of the costs. But I think another industry other than home builders that should be brought on is the banking industry, and government can provide the framework for that. I mentioned the energy efficiency mortgages before, where bankers offering mortgages should have that up front and say, hey, if you're planning on buying this house, you can add in all of these upgrades, and then it'll become part of your mortgage. You will qualify. Bankers bankers allow buyers to qualify for a higher amount because they know that if they incorporate these energy efficient technologies, they'll have lower utility bills and can afford to pay the mortgage better. So that's a win-win-win situation because the customer ends up with lower utility bills, the bank ends up with a higher loan that they get more interest on, and the contractor gets new projects in energy efficiency, so they get more work out of it. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. And so the government should provide tax incentives to help offset the cost of some of these energy efficiency upgrades, but also really push the banking industry to educate home buyers and present this up front as an option for them to upgrade their homes.
So Catherine, because you are the utility with an obligation to serve every single customer, and Hakan has already talked about 50% would make scale, right? 50% penetration. Tell me how we're going to do this and keep it affordable. What needs to happen with regulators and government policymakers so that we hit the affordability? Because we have this, right? Safe, reliable, affordable is a big one. So how do we do this affordably?
Yeah, it's something we spend a lot of time thinking about because affordability, in my mind, nothing stalls the clean energy transformation more than a lack of affordability for energy or a reliability challenge. And so to me, these are two crucial elements that we need to solve for. At Duke, we're certainly leaning in with government programs like LIHEAP and others that exist to help customers defray energy costs, particularly those at the lower end of the economic ladder. We also have a number of programs in place to help customers pay their bills. In addition to my role leading sustainability, I also run the foundation, and we've been partnering with nonprofits across our service territory, specifically looking at a program called Rebuilding Together, where we're helping upgrade senior citizens' homes with energy-efficient technologies so that they're able to age in place and keep their energy bills affordable. And then I think about federal programs like the IRA. Those are tax incentives for things like nuclear and other that go directly towards defraying customer costs. So I think there are a lot of programs in place, but I think at the end of the day, that's why this potential partnership with our customers, our residential customers, is so key. Energy efficiency makes all the sense in the world. It allows people to reduce their energy bills, making those programs accessible to all instead of some. Equally important. And then thinking about the advantage not just to the customer but to the utility in terms of being able to defray or defer the need to build additional generation mitigates another cost that goes to customers.
So I spend most of my time working with policymakers. So I'm going to ask you a question that will be a benefit to me to make my job a little bit easier. And that really is, how do we communicate and work with policymakers to communicate these policies so that people support them? But I'm going to make this a two-parter. The second part is it the policymaker's job to communicate? Should we all be doing it together? What is the right framework to bring people along with us on this journey? And I'd like all of you to answer that one.
That's a tough one. I mean, it's
go
people, particularly as you mentioned, Americans are very resilient and very pathologically independent and don't like to be told what to do. And so it needs to be framed in a way that it's beneficial to the homeowners. So it needs to be a lot of education out there from policymakers and from professionals about how reducing your energy costs will help you financially, will help the environment. That's the reason why we're here today is to help to mitigate climate issues, and also will help the grid. And so there needs to be a lot of education out there, and that's one large role the government can play is just in increasing the amount of education to the general public about the benefits of all of these.
We spend a lot of time with our policymakers ensuring that we're bringing the perspectives of all of our stakeholders forward. My sense is, and I've only been in the energy sector for about 3 years, but my sense is it was an industry that kind of existed for a long time, kind of behind the scenes. We're going to generate some power, we're going to transmit it, and we're going to distribute it. We're not going to build a lot. It was just an industry that kind of churned in the back. And we're no longer in a place where we can do that. We're front and center. We're front and center with companies. We're front and center with supply chain. We're front and center with policymakers. So we spend a lot of time sharing the number of customers in our service territory that have their own renewable or clean goals. And that's not just the big companies, it's the mom and pop companies, it's people like my mom and dad who still live in Duke Energy's service territory. We spend a lot of time talking about the next generation of innovation that's coming to our space and about the importance and criticality of modernizing the grid. So not to steal from a panelist's comments, but I think education is so essential in this space.
So when it comes to working with the policymakers on big transformations like this, I believe in three things. One is transparency, two, awareness, and three, win-win. Transparency is the key to start with because we're working on all kinds of different solutions and ideas in different industries, in different domains, and understanding what everybody else is doing, openly discussing, attending events like this with moderations like yours, talk about these problems openly and the challenges and the opportunity that are in front of us. Lay it on the table, so make it visible. Two, awareness. Building on the transparency, we need to go work with policymakers and the other way around, cross industries, and train and educate policymakers on potential solutions that we're working on. Make them aware of what we have on the pipeline, and this is what we're doing very actively right now. I was just in DC myself a couple of weeks ago, spent a full 2 days working at discussing with the policymakers, congressional staff, Department of Energy, etc., sharing our story and what we can do, how we can help. And three is the win-win. The solutions that will win at the end, that will get us to the net zero 2050 as a success story, they need to be win-win for most. Not all, we know that, but most. So this is why the solutions that we believe that a lot of the stakeholders will win with, consumers, policymakers, governments, several industries, all together, different countries, different regions, different municipalities. We need to think big and really make this happen all together. We're on the same boat. We're living on the same planet. This has to be a win-win for a lot of people.
Okay. I'm going to ask, are there any questions? I have more questions, but does anyone have any questions? No questions? No? You kind of have a question? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Any questions?
Hold on, let's get you a microphone.
Thank you. Actually, quite a lot of questions on many of the questions that you have raised as well. What you mentioned with your three-tier approach, I would call, how can we achieve systemic efficiency? Like, meet the desire with what's there in the most efficient manner. And Eric, I connect with many things you mentioned. But in respect to educating people, I guess it's planting the seed in entrepreneurs to enable them to produce or to manufacture the products so that they are net zero compatible, because what's out on the shelves right now is often not yet. So we need to rush and hurry in getting these products compatible. And as for the homeowners and the builders, as long as those who plan buildings have it in their toolkit as a default, they are the ones advising their customers on how they should build. So the customers don't know that by default. And I think what you mentioned regarding how can we attract people to want to do that, it's understanding their needs and desires and what appeals to them. And that, I guess, in what you mentioned, that would be, if you do this, you increase your independence. Mm-hmm. You maximize your say in what's going on if you become energy independent. So that's more a comment than a question, actually.
Maybe one thing on your first question on the consumer side and how do we make this work in the homes. We need to provide the solutions to the consumers, especially talking about residential homeowners. We need to provide these solutions at minimum additional cost to them with almost no sacrifice on comfort or convenience. They need to be a part of the sustainability journey, but they should not be bearing the entire burden. You cannot offload, download everything on them. So this is why we need to be smart, work together with energy utilities, with consulting partners, with government, and find ways to make sustainable solutions standardized at scale as seamlessly as possible with coordination, orchestration, and collaboration. That is super critical to get to scale.
One optimistic thing I would say is that the younger generation gets it. And I'm seeing this, across the board. I sometimes do career days to the middle school that my son went to, and the kids get it. They understand the environmental impact of energy consumption, and they go home and they scold their parents for leaving televisions on in rooms. And so, if there's any optimism to be had, is that the next generation appears to be geting it, and I think that they're going to be less resilient, and there'll be less barriers to making these things happen.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to ask you guys one final question. Because I think, to think about thinking about policymakers, and we started this conversation talking about how customers have lots of things that they're concerned about. And so is this one of the things, how do you get on their radar when customers and consumers have a whole host of other priorities? And I think it's important, they should have other priorities. This actually probably should not be the most important thing. Policymakers also have a lot of priorities. And as we think about energy in today's context, with lots of conflicts around the world, we're seeing, last year, we thought we would be seeing a decline in drilling for oil. We started that way. We ended up with the war in Ukraine, and we ended up seeing more drilling occurred, right? And so how do we think about energy security in this larger context of a transition and all the other things that are going on in the world? And I promise that is my final question, but it popped in my head, so I'm asking.
It's a great question. I think if I'm a policymaker, which I think everyone is grateful that I am not one, I think energy security is top of mind, cybersecurity is top of mind, affordability is top of mind. Also, I think you'll see in the U.S. and abroad, just thinking about affordability as people transition to electrification, as they transition to EVs, where they pay their bills is going to change too. And so there's a shift in terms of energy wallet that is underway. So if I'm a policymaker, I'm paying attention to that because those are our customers or their voters. I'm thinking about reliability in a way where I maybe never have before. And again, if I'm a policymaker and the lights go out in my community, that's a voting issue. So I think if I'm a policymaker right now, I'm absolutely sitting down with my energy providers. I'm sitting down with partners like Carrier to really try and understand what's happening in the U.S., how are we thinking about energy security, energy resiliency, energy affordability, energy accessibility, all energy equity, all of the things that really will come to manifest in their territory.
Okay.
This is a long journey, and there's going to be a lot of roadblocks on the way for sure. We need to stay focused.
Okay.
Before we published our roadmap this week on net zero 2050, the first thing we did was we built the process in-house with our leadership on how we prioritize R&D investments for sustainability goals. We are spending over 80% of our R&D on sustainable solutions and products. That is our goal. And that's what we're planning, that's how we're driving. Once we make that commitment, it needs to cascade down in the organization, because once you commit, it becomes your reality and you have to deliver. And it starts with innovation and R&D, because this is how you shape the future. And this is what we're doing right now. And we're fully committed, we're investing in those technologies, we're gonna make it happen. Next step is you go into your ecosystem, work with the others on the same journey, and get their support and buy-in, and also tell you what not to do. Sometimes we might be in the wrong direction. We want to know. If our energy partners say, that's not going to work, we want to know. So we can course correct and focus on the right solution. Again, this is a process where It doesn't matter where the ideas come from. We need to make sure that the best ideas always win. This is a process where we need to make sure that it's a win-win for everyone and we get to net zero all together. Once again, if we don't do the right thing on the energy side, the other industries will fail. If the other industries create products that are not considering the grid resiliency, we're going to fail. We're all on the same boat, and we need to win together.
I think in terms of resiliency and energy security, I think distributed renewable generation is going to be such an important part of that, but it has to be in combination with a strong grid, as Catherine said, because if you have, say, for example, a lot of homes or a lot of businesses that are providing their own energy using solar and storage, you still need the grid to provide reliable energy in case that system goes down. And on the flip side to that, if the grid goes down in a certain area, homes that have solar and storage will be up and running until the grid gets back online. So it has to work in combination together, and I think smart metering is an important component of that, but the concept of distributed renewable generation in combination with a strong grid will give both. Will give us resiliency and will give us energy security, because you can't, if you take out the grid but it doesn't affect buildings because they have their own energy, it's ineffective. Or if you take out a building solar energy but the grid is still available, taking down that part is ineffective, so it reduces the power of anybody to take a grid down. And it also saves costs in the long run, so I think that's got to be an important combination together.
So we're just at time. I want to make sure if there are any other questions, or we're going to wrap it up. I think we're good.
Actually, I have one question for Catherine, because it's something that I
Yes.
don't know a whole lot about, is this concept I've heard a lot about, unbundling consumption from utility bills. I've read about it. I really don't know how that would work. Is that something that's being considered, or?
I know we're considering it, but I'm not the closest to what we're doing with that area.
What would a utility bill look like then if a consumption was unbundled from utility bills?
I don't think I understand the question.
So if you're not billed based on kilowatt hour consumption, how would you be?
It's a great question for someone else.
For
I'm
someone
happy
else,
to
okay,
connect
great.
you to that
I
person.
was curious because I've heard a lot about it, but I really don't know anything about it.
Okay. So I'm going to invite each of you to give us some final thoughts. If you have something that you just, that thing that you don't want people to leave this room and not forget. What is that thing, Eric?
That energy efficiency doesn't have to be something that costs you something.
Okay.
And that if you finance energy efficiency over the long time, whether it's through a mortgage or any other way, then you don't pay anything up front. Your small costs on that upgrade will be more than offset by your savings each month, so that from the first month you do it, you're going to be reducing your costs. And so stop thinking about energy efficiency as something that costs something, but something that will save you money every month.
Catherine?
That this is a systems challenge, and systems challenges require collaboration across the value chain, which is why I'm excited that we're starting to see that with companies like Carrier as we're solving for net zero.
Hakan?
That is the key. Collaboration, partnerships. We need to invent the future together. We're all on the same boat.
Okay. Well, I thank each of you, and I will tell you, you've left me with one message, which is it's time to build a bigger tent. Yeah. It really, really is. It's time to build a tent. We now need bankers, home builders, utilities, technology companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's time to build a bigger tent. I thank you all for your time and your insights, and really appreciate all that you had to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much.